Hannah Murray on TRE in the afternoon.
Joining us on the line now is Julia Franck. She's an award-winning and best-selling author who was born in communist East Berlin in 1970. Her latest book, Worlds Apart, is an auto-fictional novel based very much on the diaries of her early life. When desperate to escape a childhood of rural poverty, neglect and shame, she became addicted to writing. Aged 13, she left her family and moved to West Berlin. Welcome to the show, Julia.
Thank you for having me, Hannah. Hello.
Hi, it's so lovely to have you with us. Thank you. And with regards to the format of your book, first of all, I just wanted to ask you why you wrote it as a auto-fictional novel. What made you not go completely into a novel or not make it a memoir?
Well, I think maybe from certain points of view, you could call it a memoir, but what might have interested me most was to focus on certain motifs, on certain themes in my life, which is about coming of not only age, but coming of the East, coming of heritage, which meant a lot of insecureness and shame to me when I was a child and a young adult. And then, of course, it's also a love story. And I think the frame of the dramatic span of the story is my counterpart, my first love, whom I'm telling my life in a certain view. And since he died when we were 22, I decided to stop the book with that day, to start it and to stop it with that very day.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. He died at 22. That's so young.
Yeah, it is too young, far too young. But on the other hand, it made me maybe understanding other people's love and loss and having a deep understanding for grief. You just played Amy Winehouse before we met here, and I just wanted to thank you because I really love her voice. She's so brilliant. Yeah.
That's my pleasure. So tell me, if you can, a bit about your childhood, what you remember of moving at the age of 8 from East to West Berlin and what that meant, what you understood at the time.
In the presence, it's always hard to tell what I did understand at that very point of my life in that very time. But I think that since I have a twin sister and both of us, we were very close when we were little and we shared almost every experience, and we were telling us our experience and shaped our memory in a certain way, which I found later, a lot later. I found it again in a very good novel of the Hungarian Swiss writer Agota Christoph. In her Grand Cahier, she called that book. And it's also about twins. And the relationship between twins is very special. And we shaped and constructed a memory and also tried to control and to animate and to create our memory everything single day, and maybe in all of our talks when we were little.
Yeah. And do you remember understanding the difference between East and West Germany and the significance as why you were moving?
Yes, of course. And it didn't only start with our leaving the East, but it also was always connected to our grandmother's decision to move from the West, or the former West, to the East after the war, when she came back from exile and came back to Germany. She was Jewish, and she went to the eastern part of Germany by decision, by will. She was born in the West and in a very bourgeois family, and it was her decision to bring her children to the East. So this was always a very well-known fact in our family. And since she had been a very matriarch, a very important and central figure in all my family. And she was the one to condemn the West and the values of the West. It was always the capitalists and the wanting of consuming of all the things which cost a lot, but my mother decided to go to the West also to give us, her children, her daughters, a free education, an education which could lead to an independent decision what to study, what to become, what to learn. And I think she was more in the search for a social independence and a social freedom than thinking in economically and in economical ways. Mm. And I think for my sisters and myself, especially the very beginning in the West was hard. It was very rough because we then lived in a refugee camp in West Berlin for months, and nobody ever had told us before that you could be stuck in a refugee camp. Being a German, speaking the same language like all others around you, but living in a camp in very close, with no intimacy at all, close with another family, which in our case spoke Russian. So we shared the same kitchen and a very single bathroom, and it was a very prägend, a very shaping and moving time for all of us, I think.
Mm. It must have been very difficult to understand as a child why you would have moved from East Berlin, being in a house, to West Berlin and being in a camp like that. That must have been, right. You must have been questioning why your parents would have done that.
Right. And it wasn't our parents, but since all of my sisters, only my twin and me, we share the same father. The other sisters have different fathers. So my mother made her decision all by herself. She didn't ask any of her boyfriends or later or former husbands. So and she was a very traumatized woman herself, I think, because her youth as well was very hard, very tough, being a child without any father, of a Jewish mother in the after-war time in Germany meant that she was excluded by everybody. All other children in her school called her bastard and were mocking her and her brother, and she never had a secure and a very caring childhood herself, and then later her beloved brother committed suicide when he was 18, a few months after the wall was built. So it really condensed their whole family life is a condensation of very tragical events. And I think my mother also, if I was not agreeing with most of her decisions in my teenage ages, and I really did not understand her, and I was angry at my mother when I was a teenager. But later I started to understand her becoming and her very traumatic childhood she had.
You talk about in the book how your mother had little interest in child rearing. Is that how you see it? What was your relationship like with her?
Yes, she was not an ideological woman in first place, but more suffering her own depression and her own loss of orientation. So she just could not care, I think. And maybe today somebody from a social care would come and look for the children. But in the 70s, when we arrived in West Germany, and at first place in the refugee camp, and later then we went to the north, to Schleswig-Holstein, close to the Danish border, and there was no public social watching, or she was just she was living in a house then and growing her own vegetables and living from social welfare. We were very poor then, and we had only worn dresses, vintage dresses, which would be cool today, but then we at this time we were very ashamed of course, and it was a very untypical childhood in the 70s of the Wirtschaftswunder, the economically welfare in Western Germany.
Yeah. I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing. I feel like you're talking about your mother with a lot of compassion and understanding as to what she went through in a sort of justifiable way as to how she was with you. But I'm guessing at the time as a child, you don't necessarily have that compassion and understanding. It's you just have a lot more questions, I guess.
Exactly. And this is also a reason why I used some of my diaries I wrote then, because I was very astonished how sharp, how brilliant I focused on the things that happened those days. I was describing, for example, a visit of friends of hers, old friends of hers, and describing it minute by minute, very detailed, how they reacted to my mother's cows, to her complete hippie cow's life, and from the beginning when they entered our house, and how they instantly decided not to stay overnight, but to leave, and how they would excuse in front of us children because they were so compassionate and they were suffering with us, but they couldn't stand to stay overnight. And this is an experience in my childhood I would have forgotten if I had not written that diary. But then, of course, there are other memories I vividly know and see in my inner frame, but which I did not write down at all because I would not think about writing it down, for example.
Yeah.
And so I decided to give that book a dramatic span and a structure, which is also including how memory becomes a memory, how an event or a forgotten event could live over, how it could survive.
Yeah. And I want to ask you about leaving the family home at the age of 13. That's obviously incredibly young. How and why did that happen?
Yeah, like I just told you, it was a very, very stressful childhood for me. I also had a lot of trouble with myself then, and I, for example, I always needed to wash my hands. Either I came home or I left a bus or anything, and I touched anything and outside, I needed to wash my hands. There was a real Waschzwang for me, and I could not sleep for months. And there was no therapist or anything like that around, because it was the 70s and early 80s, and nobody would have thought about giving some help to that child. And I remember how I confronted myself with that environment in my diary. And I became clear by reflecting my environment. I became clear that I had no place there in that family, in that nucleus, and that I needed to leave. I really needed to leave. And I remember how I first discussed with my twin that both of us would like to leave. But then I remember she had a very good friend and she wanted to stay and she was not sure about. And I was fighting I was asking my mother, Mother, can I leave? And I cannot stand living here with you and the whole chaos any longer. And she was very understanding. She was very empathizing in certain ways, which is astonishing again, that she, being busy with her own all the time, being completely overwhelmed by her depression, in certain moments got a glimpse for her child. And then she asked friends of hers if they would be able to take me. And they told me that those were friends from the East as well, but they fled a few years ago. And we know those friends from forever. So I knew them when I was born already. So, and when she asked Steffi and Martin if they would agree to take me, at least for a while, they were confident that I could recover maybe in their family. They had 2 little children then. And I think in the first, it was planned only for a year, but then I stayed for 2.5 years. And then I moved on in a living house community.
And how was that? How did you feel once you left home? Was it a real moment in your life, a real positive change?
Yes. I remember I was very relieved, and I found myself so relaxed and so in peace, and I enjoyed being in my room. I often have to think about Virginia Woolf and her wish for a room for herself, and I can absolutely identify with that wish, at least and especially in that times. And Steffi was about 20 years older than me. She was like 33 then, and I was 13. And Steffi was very concerned. After a few weeks, she thought, oh, this is very strange, and maybe I have to worry about that girl because she would not leave her room. And I was writing and reading. I was discovering literature and reading and writing and becoming of.
Yeah. So did you or do you see Steffi as a mother figure?
Interesting question. She passed about 10 years ago, but until her death, she kept being a very important figure in my life. I would say she was more like an intellectual master for me, not a motherly friend in first place. She was also motherly in certain things, but she mainly supported my my reading, my writing, my becoming somebody who knows what she would see and watch in theater pieces and films and so on. She was working at a theater. She was a dramaturg, and she was a very intellectual person.
Nice. And did the relationship with your mother change or build again after you left home? How did that?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. It changed a lot. And I think maybe the first years we still had some fights and some argues because, for example, she never called or wrote a letter. She just didn't think of me. She that was part of her depression, maybe, that she would ignore and forget about me when I wasn't there, and I got used to it. I was not astonished after a year or two. I did not expect her to call or to write or to visit at all. But when we met from time to time, like 2-3 times a year, we met. We got into discussions, and I think I needed to become maybe 20, maybe after Stefan's death, when I was 22, that I started to ask questions, to ask my mother, why was that? How could you do that? How do you remember this or that? And it was always different than I thought, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
We are different.
Absolutely. Well, it's amazing that you've written this book. I could talk to you for so much longer, but unfortunately we're going to have to leave it there. So people definitely have to get a copy of Worlds Apart. It's available on our website, TRE.radio, and it's by Julia Franck, who we've been chatting with today. Julia, thank you so much for joining us. Really lovely to chat with you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you so much.